I once believed my life was perfect, not in a grand, luxurious way, but in the simple, heartfelt moments that made a house a home. I had a loving wife, two wonderful children, and a life that, though modest, was filled with warmth and laughter. We didn't have extravagant vacations or a mansion on a hill, but what we had felt like enough. Every evening, no matter how exhausting my workday had been, I made sure to be home for dinner at 7. It wasn't just a meal, it was a ritual. We would gather around the table, sharing stories, laughter, and the small victories of the day. At 8, bedtime stories were another sacred tradition, an intimate time when I would weave magical tales that made my children's eyes sparkle with wonder. And Sundays? Those were for movie nights, when we would pile onto the couch under cozy blankets, popcorn in hand, lost in the glow of the screen and the comfort of each other's presence. These routines, though seemingly ordinary, were the foundation of our lives. They were the small, consistent gestures that kept us connected, the threads that wove our family together into something unbreakable. Or so I thought. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, everything changed. My wife, the woman I had loved for over a decade, the woman whose laughter once filled our home, began to drift away. It started with little things. A kiss she used to plant on my cheek before I left for work suddenly became a distracted nod. Our dinners, once filled with conversation and warmth, grew quieter, the silence stretching between us like an invisible wall. I noticed her eyes, once always meeting mine, now lost in some distant thought, her mind miles away even as she sat right beside me. I told myself it was nothing, that she was just tired, that stress and the weight of daily life had dulled her spark. I clung to the hope that she would return to me, that the warmth would find its way back into her touch, her voice, her presence. But as the days turned into weeks, that hope withered. Her silence was no longer just an absence of words. It was heavy, oppressive, a void that no amount of patience could fill. The warm greetings that used to welcome me home disappeared entirely. Where once she would rush to the door, smiling, eager to hear about my day, now she barely looked up from her phone. The absence of small affections, the simple "how was your day" or the lingering good-night kisses, became glaringly obvious. But what truly broke me was watching her light up for someone else. It was subtle at first, a soft chuckle at a text message, a smile playing on her lips when she thought I wasn't watching. Then the late-night calls started. She would step outside or lower her voice, whispering into the phone, her tone carrying a softness that I hadn't heard in months. I wanted to believe it was innocent. People text, people laugh. She was allowed to have friends. But deep down, something inside me twisted, warning me that this wasn't just simple amusement. This was something else. Our home, once my sanctuary, had become a place where I felt like a stranger. I used to be the person she turned to for comfort, for laughter, for love. Now, I was just there, an observer in my own marriage, a ghost in the life we had built together. Dinner, once a cherished gathering, had turned into a hollow routine. I would sit across from her, watching as she scrolled through her phone, laughing at messages from someone else, barely acknowledging my presence. When I asked who she was talking to, the answer was always the same, just a friend. I tried to be understanding. I told myself I was overreacting, that I was letting paranoia get the best of me. But how does one stay calm when their partner starts disappearing for hours without explanation? When the person they love most slowly fades into someone they can no longer reach? Then, one morning, the silence took on a new weight. It was no longer just quiet. It was the absence of everything. I greeted her as I always did, expecting at least a muttered response, but she didn't even look up. I asked if she wanted breakfast. Nothing. I stood there, watching her, waiting for even the smallest acknowledgement, but all I got was the soft hum of her scrolling through her phone. In a desperate attempt to break through to her, I sent her a text. From across the room, a single message asking, "Are you okay?" I saw her glance at her screen, read the message, and then scroll past it, as if I were nothing more than spam in her inbox. By that evening, I stopped trying. I sat with my children, helping them with their homework, forcing a smile even as my heart crumbled inside my chest. The woman I had loved for over a decade was right there, just a few feet away, and yet she had never felt so far. That night, as she moved past us without a second glance, it became painfully clear that we were nothing more than shadows in her world, faint, unacknowledged, irrelevant. I watched her sleep, her breathing slow and peaceful, as if the weight of her indifference had never burdened her. Strangely, I felt no anger in that moment, no resentment. Instead, a profound, unwavering calm settled over me, the kind that precedes a decision so absolute, so final, that there is no turning back. I glanced toward my children's room, where the remnants of their innocent joy lay scattered. Tiny shoes lined up haphazardly, stuffed animals left mid-adventure, crayon drawings taped to the walls. The sound of their laughter echoed in my mind, mingling with the painful realization that they deserved better. They should grow up knowing that love is not silent, that affection is not something to be begged for, and that being ignored is not a normal part of life. If she truly believed we were insignificant, then I would show her what real absence felt like. Moving quietly, I retrieved a suitcase I had hidden away for this very moment. A contingency I never wanted to consider, but had always known deep down would come. I packed with precision, taking only what was essential. My children's favorite clothes, their most beloved toys, comfortable shoes for wherever the road might take us. No excess, no clutter. I wasn't planning to come back. Not after this. By 3 a.m., I was ready. There was no need for a note. Notes are for those who deserve explanations, and she had long since forfeited that right. I stood for a moment in the doorway, taking one last look at her. The woman I had loved, the woman I had built a life with, the woman who had slowly erased me from her world. There was no sadness, no longing, just quiet acceptance. The click of the lock behind me felt final, like the closing of a book whose last chapter had already been written. As I carefully buckled my children into the car, my youngest stirred, rubbing her sleepy eyes. In a small, drowsy voice, she asked, "Where are we going, Daddy?" I pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead and whispered, "Somewhere better, baby." The engine rumbled to life, filling the silence that had consumed our home for far too long. Without a second thought, I turned off my phone, severing the last tether to the life we were leaving behind. There was no GPS, no clear destination. Just the open road stretching endlessly before us, bathed in the dim glow of streetlights, leading us toward an uncertain but necessary future. As the city lights faded in my rear-view mirror, I imagined her waking up in the morning, stretching lazily, reaching for her phone, expecting the same monotonous routine of silence and indifference. But today would be different. She would call my name. No response. She would check the children's room and find only emptiness. Closets half open, beds left unmade, a house suddenly devoid of life. Panic would set in as she fumbled with her phone, dialing my number only to be met with voicemail. No read receipts, no replies, just silence. I could see it in my mind, her pacing back and forth, calling her mother, her friends, asking if they had seen us. Desperation creeping into her voice as the weight of my absence settled in. She had ignored me for weeks, for months, as if I were invisible. Now, she would understand what that truly meant. Her calls would multiply 10, 20, 30 missed calls. But I wouldn't answer. She would cry, her voice breaking, pleading, "Please, just answer." But I was no longer there to listen. As I drove into the horizon, the first streaks of sunrise painted the sky in soft golds and deep crimsons. In the back seat, my children slept, blissfully unaware of the magnitude of this moment. They had no idea that their lives had just changed forever, that we were leaving behind the cold, unspoken neglect, and stepping into something new, a fresh start, a place where love was not taken for granted. a life where presence mattered. For years, she had made me feel invisible. Now, for the first time in a long time, I felt seen, and I was determined to build a life filled with the warmth and love that we all deserved.